everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. Last week, we introduced this new topic that we're going through, which is Christians and politics. And we kind of gave a little bit of an explanation that this month it's kind of a serious month, and there's going to be a lot of different words and ideas that we talk about that can be triggering to a lot of people. But we really want to address what we're supposed to do as Christians in society, in politics, and all that kind of stuff. So today we're actually talking about the idea of this political climate that we're in, this political landscape. Mm-hmm. And there's some words associated with that, and there's history associated with that as well. And so Travis and I have Tony on, and we're excited because Tony used to actually be a teacher, and he's all into history, and so hopefully we'll get some good history lessons taught to us today. But just to kind of start out, I'm going to say this word, Christian nationalism.
Two words. Two
words. Christian nationalism. It's something we hear a lot today, and there seems to always be this hijacking of definitions and words. And so just off the forefront, I will say there is a difference between patriotism and nationalism. And nationalism is like patriotism, but it's an extreme view of patriotism to the point of putting another group down. Yeah. And so based on the true definition of nationalism, like very much against it. Nationalism in no way, shape, or form is a good thing. But there's been these definitions that have kind of diluted this word and shifted it and kind of become triggering for many. So Travis, give us some examples of what we mean by what we're saying here.
Yeah, so I mean, like, just the first thing that came to mind when you were like, oh, patriotism and nationalism, it's Ron Swanson. It's patriotism when he's like, I love the United States, and like, this is the great country, and nationalism when he goes over to Europe and he just hates on everything in Europe. But so I mean, the problem, like you said, with these words and so many words in our culture today is that they're being hijacked, redefined, and not even hijacked and redefined in a very particular direction, but like there's a plethora of definitions. It's not like they, just moved it a different direction. They're actually forking it into multiple definitions to where if you say a phrase, it could mean 5 different things plus, like, to just so many different people. So if you actually Google Christian nationalism, these are the first 2 definitions that come up, and they're very different. Yeah. The first is that and this is the Wikipedia definition. It's the very first one that comes up. Christian nationalism is a type of religious nationalism that is affiliated with Christianity. That seems pretty obvious. Okay. It primarily focuses on the internal politics of society, such as legislating civil and criminal laws that reflect the review of Christianity and the role of religion in politics and social life. So basically, this version of the definition is basically saying, you believe in Jesus, you're a Christian, and so the things you vote for, the things you desire for the country are based on the beliefs of Jesus. So based on the ethics of Jesus, based on what the Bible says is good and not good, that's what you say is good and not good in your politics. So really it's just reflective of your belief, which that's literally every person in the world. Yeah. Their politics reflect their belief. The other definition that is second when you Google this is Christian nationalism is the belief that the American nation is defined by Christianity and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. Popular Christian nationalists assert that America is and must remain a Christian nation, not merely as an observation about American history, but as a prescriptive program for what America must continue to be in the future. And so this is more of a Christian nationalists believe that the government should be prescribing Christianity for all to believe and embrace. And that is very similar to what we see in the Crusades. It's very similar to what we saw with Catholicism in Europe, where it's like the Pope and the government were like essentially in bed together, and like it was legislated, like, you are part of our country.
During the Holy Roman Empire,
yeah, where it's like, you believe this, so you're part of our nation, so you should be a Christian. Those are 2 very different things.
Yeah. So it's interesting, the whole word Christian nationalist or nationalist. I think that it's a label that was, it was given to, kind of the the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party in order to compare him to Hitler.
Yep.
You know, it was a label that was given to him so that they can associate this MAGA movement or this candidate and eventually the party as being the party of Hitler, because Hitler was a national socialist. And so by taking that word to
apply to someone else,
to apply to that group, it really it was a way of weaponizing the language.
Words,
and unfortunately, I think a lot of people said, "Oh, nationalists, I'm for America, therefore I'm going to wear that as a badge," and not knowing that it would be used against them later.
It's
so probably a better word for that group of people that are calling themselves. Or maybe not calling themselves nationalists, but are calling themselves maybe MAGA, would be a populist. So populism is more of what is the desire of the populace or the people, and how do they want to be governed, and how do they want to be ruled, and what kind of laws are they looking for? So this whole Christian nationalism is an unfortunate tag that a group of people were labeled, and that same group and others picked up and said, "Yeah, we'll wear that." But what it has done is it has allowed the other side to say, "Oh, well, so was Hitler. He was a nationalist, and so was Stalin, and which is the precursor or a form of fascism. So which does not describe the people, I don't think, who are in that community.
And that's why it's dangerous, and it's the enemy obviously wants to confuse and cause all this destruction. And so we just have to be really careful.
In general, that's why I try not to allow certain labels like that to be applied. Whenever someone's like, "Oh, are you a Christian nationalist?" Always ask, like, "What do you mean by that?" Because if they mean someone who, believes that if you believe that Jesus says, this or this or this, that you should vote that way to promote those things, then sure, I guess you can specifically label me with that specific definition, but I would not say that's what I am. And in general, we as humans, we try to categorize things by giving definitions like that. But especially over the last 15-ish years, we've started hijacking so many phrases left and right so quickly that you always have to ask, what do you mean by that? Like you're saying I'm this, but what is your definition of that? Because usually it's not accurate. Usually they're just, like you were saying, they're trying to put something on you so they can use it against you later, instead of just trying to accurately show your beliefs. Because when you accurately show your beliefs, most people honestly don't have much to argue against. It's when they have a straw man where they are able to throw a label on it and say, "Oh, that's straw man. See, Hitler was that." And then it's just, well, that's not actually what I believe, though.
You guys are young, and so to borrow the Ron Swanson, I know much more than you guys. But when as I was your age, and I guess, Travis, you're now 30, right?
Yeah.
You're still in your 20s, correct? So when I was in my 20s, being part of Calvary Chapel, in every Calvary Chapel bookstore, before they all closed because we got the internet, they sold stickers. And one of those stickers was the guy holding up his finger like this, saying one way to heaven. One of the very popular stickers that was on everybody's bumper was a rainbow, because it promoted God's promise to never flood the earth again and to protect His creation. Well, that's been hijacked. That's been hijacked, and it means something different. When I was a teenager, the term something that was bad was bad. But by the time I graduated from high school, man, if it's bad, it's good. So words change and have different meanings, and so it is very important that we define what we actually believe, and we define what ask people to define, what do you mean when you ask me, am I this or am I that? Are you a Christian? Well, what do you mean by that? What are you asking me? Let me define my faith to you. So it's very important that we parse those words accurately.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's really, I mean, unfortunately, like this shouldn't be happening. People should not be taking cheap shots by redefining words. That just shouldn't happen.
Right.
However, it is. And so it's on us to make sure that we are the ones careful when navigating that minefield of conversation to make sure people are actually defining the terms, make sure people are actually having to be intellectually honest in the conversation. The documentary American Gospel 2, the second one in their series, did a great job of this, just unpacking a ton of words, whether it be love or sacrifice, propitiation, all these different things have been hijacked to mean different things than they are. And to say, no, this is what the actual meaning is, and as we actually believe. And if you say it means this, or you believe this, that doesn't line up with scripture.
Yeah.
And it's important that in all these conversations, we're always defining terms with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just for example, one of the terms that have been redefined is the pronouns right now. I mean, if we can go there a little bit.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with somebody and they were telling me that they were moving into their house. And I said, oh, okay, so it's these two people? And they said, no, it's just they. And I was really lost in the conversation for a while because it was very confusing because the term had been redefined for them, but had not yet been redefined for me.
Yeah.
And so, those are things we just got to watch out for and make sure that we're all on the same page. It's sad that we're redefining language. And that comes all the way over to, and this is maybe going off topic a little bit, but hate crimes and hate speech. As we're redefining language, what is hateful today might not have been hateful yesterday, or
would have been hateful and just looked down upon as now considered a crime and criminal, which is very different.
The idea of violence and what is violence.
Yeah.
And
right.
Yeah.
So, and these things are entering into the political realm, even to the point to where, there are a splinter group, and it's a minority, but it's there nonetheless, and their voice is getting louder, that says that the Constitution of our country has been was written by white slave owning mean guys, and it's like, well, really, is that maybe they were white, maybe some of them did own slaves, but is that really worth saying that that's a hateful document because haters wrote it?
Yeah.
So, and I would like to ask people who think that, what would they have done if they found themselves in a place of privilege back, 250 years ago when these things were being formed?
Yeah.
What would have been your attitude? And part of it is a morphing of culture.
Yeah.
We tend to adapt those things to culture. And so those things are now entering the political realm and really making it difficult to have conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and just to kind of throw this in there, what's our response then? Like, how should Christians act if we're not, Christian nationalists? And what I think you gave a great definition, but how would we define that? If it's not Christian nationalism, what do we say here?
Well, I think the first things that Christians need to do is realize that if they're born again Christian, then they are in the kingdom of God and not the kingdom of America.
Mm-hmm.
And so first off is we are not of this world.
Yeah.
We're following a different king in our faith. That doesn't mean that we disobey our laws. We got to obey our laws.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't put the weight of our existence and our happiness and our joy and our purpose into what's going on in our country.
Yeah.
Christianity exists on every continent of the world, and they have very different political systems, and Christians have been successfully able to walk a joyous, victorious life under all sorts of different political regimes. So that's the first thing that Christians need to understand, is that my relationship with God, my faith, and my joy is not dependent upon whether there's a Democrat in the office or a Republican or an independent, or whether we change our constitution or it stays the same, or what state I live in, because there is a lot of migration going on right now between red and blue states, and so we're seeing more division. But that's not the realm in which we operate. We operate first in a realm of faith, and we can take our faith with us even into the prisons or into the wilderness or into our homes, and we can take it into the political realm as well. But its primary is that we walk with Jesus. We don't walk according to what's going on politically around us.
Yeah. I love the imagery of like us being pilgrims and sojourners that we find like in 1 Corinthians. I think we also find it in Colossians, maybe, but 1 Corinthians definitely. And I mean, to just use a very physical example, like you were saying, we're the kingdom of God, not of the kingdom of this world, but we're pilgrims and we're in this world, and we know that we should desire the best things for this world. And so, I mean, just take it as if you're an American, but you're going to live in Europe for like 2-3 years, and you get a visa and you live there. During that time, you would desire the best for the country that you're in.
Yeah.
You would desire good things for Europe. And that kind of goes back to the nationalism thing, like not hating other countries.
Yeah.
Like, you're there, you're living there as a pilgrim, as a sojourner.
Well,
you're not
because it's not the countries that we're talking about. It's the people.
Yeah.
Like we desire people.
Yeah. But you would desire flourishing where you are and stuff like that. But if in America and Europe went to war, or if America and Europe saw really disagreement on different things while you lived there, you should, as an American citizen, desire America's best while you're there. If they were disagreeing, if they were fighting, if they were having issues, same thing. Like, we live here, we're sojourners, we're pilgrims, we should be desiring the best for the country we're in, for the place we live. But ultimately, when the kingdom of God and America clash, they don't line up, when they don't represent God's values, we ought to be cheering for and desiring the kingdom of God first. And it's really no different.
Yeah.
We're temporarily here, and we ought to bless and desire a blessing upon those we're around, which includes the whole nation and ultimately the whole world.
Yep.
But it's not our first alliance and allegiance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
go ahead.
No, you go for it.
So and within that respect, if you look at this whole thing of Christian nationalism, to take that phrase and then to broad brush that label onto all churchgoers or all Christians is really kind of odd, because if you look at the force from the Western world, America in particular has sent out more missionaries to build hospitals and schools and water projects to all the nations, to nations that are open, a lot of African nations as far as bringing the gospel there, or even to closed nations, let's say the East Bloc, where we're smuggling Bibles in and giving people hope that their sins can be forgiven in a place where it's absolutely outlawed, or even into the East, where we're dealing with a totally different structure of religion, that we either have to be able to break through those barriers, or even in the case of China, where you risk your life going in and sharing things of Christ and the Bible in China. So from an aspect of Christian nationalism, it just doesn't make sense to label the Church of Jesus Christ as a Christian national organization.
Yeah.
So you brought up this point as you were going through those definitions of, this idea that the United States was founded as Christian, and so we should keep Christian values. And it kind of brings up this term of like separation of church and state.
Yeah.
What's the history behind it? How should we be thinking about this? Should there be a separation of church and state? Should we fight to not have a separation of church and state? Where are we at in this idea?
Well, the First Amendment we think of as a freedom of speech, but it's also freedom of religion. And it says that the state cannot compel any religious structure on. I can't think of the language right now, but number one is there's no state ordained or state mandated religion for the United States of America. And that was really a federal policy. And so then there was a dispute among some of the states is, can the states mandate some sort of state sponsored religion?
Yeah.
And out of that discussion,
no, I'm kidding.
And out of that discussion, there was a Baptist church in Connecticut, I want to say Newberry, but it's not Newberry. It's
that was the Danbury Baptist.
Danbury Baptist Church. They were a minority group as far as in Connecticut, and they were asking Thomas Jefferson. They wrote Thomas Jefferson, who was a new president in 1801. hey, what about this freedom of religion? What about state-sponsored religion? And that's when Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter back saying that there should be a wall of separation between the state and among the religion, amongst the between state and religion. And so the whole point was not to tear Christianity out of the state, but that the state cannot compel Christianity.
It's a one-way,
a form of Christianity.
It's a one-way wall.
Yeah.
It's not that the church or any religion cannot influence the state, because then you'd say a certain people group can't influence the state. It's not that church can't influence government. It's that government can't influence church.
But it doesn't mean that government is agnostic either. And can't have a role. Thomas Jefferson had freedom of speech as protected by the First Amendment, which also gives us the freedom of religion. Those things are linked. He presided over the largest church service during his administration. He was the presiding speaker, and it was held in the Capitol building. He encouraged the schools to use the Bible as their point of textbook, and also as a governor, he proclaimed days of fasting and days of thanksgiving and days of humility as a practice within his state, so Virginia. So it's not that it would be taking religion out of the government, but it's that government cannot compel you to walk to their sectarian views of religion or any other religion. It's all voluntary. But that doesn't mean that those who are involved in government can't themselves express themselves through their freedom of speech and freedom of religion, even on the hill of the many state governors and even in the White House.
But it's certainly not against churches having, or the people who make up the church, to have religious influence and to use their religious views in politics, because that's usually where it's attacked.
Right, and in all cases, most people have a worldview. They might not be aware that they have a worldview, but they do have a worldview, and it's that framework by which we view the world. And so, as Christians, as people of faith, as Bible believers, we have a frame that which we view the world, and so that's going to affect our decision when we go to the poll. It's going to affect our decision when we're asked by a candidate to donate to their campaign. It's going to affect our decisions on how we discuss with our neighbors and how we feel about those in power in our communities and in our nation. And we have that freedom because we have the freedom of speech and we have the freedom of religion. But does that mean that we desire a mandated religion for the United States? No, but I do think that we need to speak up and let them know about the heritage of these United States and how they were founded on the Judeo-Christian ethic.
Well, it kind of brings me back to the conversation we had with Tad. He said that there was a phrase, and you had said, a person's a person no matter how small, but he was saying this phrase of what was it? It was a person who is forced or forcibly
a person who's like basically forced to believe something still doesn't believe it. But it was a really cool way of saying it.
And I think this is exactly what we're talking about, is this idea of, because we have that First Amendment, in my mind, that is just freedom of a worldview. It's freedom that gives us freedom to have a different worldview than others, and that we, because we can vote and because we can participate in an electoral system, it's kind of it's allowing our worldview to influence in certain directions.
In the 4th century AD, Constantine declared Christianity as a Roman state religion. And it was probably one of the worst things that happened to Christianity ever, because what ended up happening is all the priests of Zeus took off their vestments and put on Christian vestments,
but still believed,
but had no faith in God. And so it was just a matter of, I'm a state employee, and now my job description has changed, so I'm just going to take off these vestments and put on new vestments and try to practice whatever the new religion is
Yeah.
without having any real faith or
Yeah.
belief in that religion.
Yeah.
So compelling people to a certain religion does absolutely no good.
Yeah. No, and I think that's important to remember, even as like we are the Christians in our country, of that sometimes you do hear people who are just desperate for what they would view as good change, and they stay and maybe even slightly believe, but they haven't thought it through, of just like, I just wish that, this law to be passed or that law to be passed. And it's like, you realize it wouldn't change the hearts of people. Like, you might restrain them a little bit more, but that doesn't change the hearts of people. And just the same amount of damage will still be done. The same amount of, lost souls will still be done. And people might even, in a certain effect, just believe themselves to be a little more ethical, where that doesn't drive people to Jesus.
Yeah, not
and
at all.
so
Right.
it is, we just be putting people in, fake robes of righteousness and patting them on the back and pretending along the way. So honestly, in some ways, us not being known as a Christian nation actually allows for help of the gospel actually go forth, instead of people just saying, I mean, you have that crisis in the South where it was you were a cultural Christian. And so you had so many people who were like truly not saved and going to hell. And it's not just the South, it's everywhere, but that was a really well-known place where everyone is a cultural Christian. You don't even know who to witness to at that point. You don't even know who to pray for, because everyone just says they're a Christian, and there's a lot of lost people who are believing that.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, we do have a voice in our country, and with that voice and our constitutional rights comes responsibility.
Yeah.
And I do think that we have a responsibility to push forward and vote for good laws, good governors,
Oh, absolutely.
good senators,
Yeah.
good representatives, and ultimately a good president.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are often having to choose sometimes between two evils, but
Yeah.
there are bad laws out there. I remember when I was a high school teacher, we were talking about law, and somebody asked me to give them an example of a bad law, and I said, okay, well, there's, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name. It was kind of at the precursor to the Black Lives Movement, but there's a gentleman who was selling cigarettes. He'd buy a pack of cigarettes and he'd sell one cigarette at a time, which was illegal. And he was arrested for it, and they put him in a headlock, and he ended up passing away during
Wow.
that time. And so that's a bad law. Here they are. You've got a person who's living in poverty, and he's trying to do what he can to buy a pack of cigarettes and break bulk and sell one at a time in order to provide for himself and maybe his family. Maybe cigarettes aren't the most ethical thing you can be doing out there, but at least he's enterprising. And so they make a law that you cannot do that, and then he gets arrested, and in the process of arrest he resists, and in the resistance he loses his life. There's a bad law gone even badder, if I could use that term. So there are bad laws out there. And we need to take responsibility, our responsibility seriously, and try to vote for good laws, because there are good laws and there are bad laws.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that's kind of the same debate with the Constitution as well, is like this idea that the Constitution is founded on principles, and how that gives the freedom to like put common sense into what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And so, but we're talking about laws. We have this kind of idea of like, there's God's laws, and then there's also like our laws that we're in now. How do we as Christians, because Tony, you mentioned it too, we're citizens of a different nation, but we still have to follow the laws here, but how far does that go, and how far should we go with it?
That's a good question. I think it's Acts chapter 14. No, it's sooner than that. Maybe it's 8. Peter and John are arrested for healing a man at the temple, and so they're arrested, and then they're brought before the Sanhedrin, and they're told, okay, you guys can go, but no longer preach in the name of Jesus, in this man's name. And Peter stands up and says, you guys judge between yourself. Is it better for us to obey man or God? And so when there's a direct commandment by God given to us that conflicts with man's law, then we are to obey God. Now, in most of those cases, it has nothing to do with. It'll never have anything to do with killing somebody. It'll never have anything to do with avoiding taxes or being,
I know, right?
ripping apart, thievery or any of those type of laws. They're more of laws of conscience and freedom, and usually dealing around speech is where we're going to run into those. And so, when there is a direct conflict of law like that, we need to obey God rather than men.
Yeah.
And so, that's where I see that conflict going. But it's generally those aren't going to violate laws against your neighbor. They're only going to violate laws of conscience. So really what the state is asking you to do is to violate your conscience, and God is saying, don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could absolutely imagine a time. I mean, we saw it with China, where they had their one child rule, and literally you're supposed to kill if you had a second child at the time. That would, I think, be a really good example of like, that is, literally told to kill someone. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Another case that I think fits really well with the example you gave, where it's more about conscience, like what is right and wrong, is in Florida. When we lived there was a man just a couple cities south of us who started feeding the homeless. There's nothing illegal about that, but he got arrested anyway. And so put in jail, how like there's the technical rule where like they can put you in jail for a day and then they have to release you if you haven't done anything. So they release him, but they told him, you need to stop feeding the homeless. And he just kept feeding the homeless. So they put him in jail again. And they said, you know what? You need to make sure you get a food handler's card. So we got a food handler's card, kept feeding the homeless, put him in jail again. And it just went on as they kept tacking on, well, you need to do it this way. You need to do it this way. And eventually they were just like, we just don't want homeless here. You have to stop feeding them because then they'll leave. And he's just like, no, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not gonna and because that was a whole thing happening in Florida where literally they bus all the homeless from one city to another and just go in a big circle. And, again, that kind of falls under he tried to obey government as far as he could. When they said you have to get food handler's license, he did. When they said you have to do this, he did. But when it came to the point of, no, you're simply not allowed to give people food, he said, I'm sorry, I'm going to give them food. And so I think that's a good example because he obeyed as far as he could. And as they kept raising the bar, he kept meeting it to be legal as long as he could. He didn't just say, no, I don't care. I'm not going to obey your law of food handlers cards or not obey your law of how it's prepared, not obey your laws about this. He kept following those as ridiculous as they were. But then when it finally came down to we just don't want you to serve and love this group of people, he said, I'm sorry, that's too far.
Yeah. I mean, the greatest commandment for all Christians is to love.
Yeah.
And how do we express that? And, I think a good part of that is when I vote a certain way because I believe, I hope, and it should be my every thought is I'm voting this direction because I love my neighbor. And I believe that this law will, or this leader is going to love, by voting for that person or for that law, I'm going to love my neighbor best that way.
Yeah. And that's part of why we get differences, is that people have different visions of how to love the neighbor best. Because rarely is the argument of, should homeless people be fed? Should homeless people be living on the streets? Rarely is the argument about there's no group out there being like, we want more homeless people on the street. Like no one's promoting that.
Yeah.
No one's voting for that. But the question is, how do you solve that?
Yeah.
And so that's where the big thing comes. That's where it all comes down to, is how do you foresee obtaining realistically to that point of human flourishing? And that's why there's differences in opinion.
Yeah, and that's why I have a hard time calling myself a Republican or a Democrat, because I see that when you look at God's law, and the scriptures say that God's law is perfect, reviving the soul. So when you look at Leviticus law or some of the laws in Numbers and Deuteronomy, and see how those are played out, like in the book of Ruth, for example, there's 3 laws that are explicitly played out in that. One is the law of the Levirate, the other one is the law of gleaning, and the other one is the law of the kinsman redeemer. And all 3 of those laws, let me think if all 3 of them, law of the Levirate, law of gleaning, and
Yeah.
the law of kinsman redeemer are a safety net
Yeah.
to stop generational poverty.
Yeah.
For example, the law of gleaning allows somebody who has fallen on hard times to go into the fields and gather food for themselves. If you were a landowner and you weren't and you went through your harvest, you were only allowed to go through and harvest one time. You couldn't go back and do a second harvest. The second harvest was for the poor, where they can go in. They had the freedom to gather up what was left behind. And that law did two things. It allowed the poor to eat, and it allowed the poor to have dignity because they got an opportunity to work for their food. The law of the levirate was a land division where if there was no male within a family and they lost their land, it allowed that family to regain their land by having a brother or sister produce an heir for you. So it was a law that if for some reason the patriarch or head of family, which it was at that time, was attached to the male, if they lost their property and there is no male heir, then an heir can be produced so that family can gain their land back. So that there would not be generational poverty. Okay, not that there wouldn't be poverty, but there wouldn't be generational poverty. And the same for the law of the kinsman redeemer. If you sold your land or lost your land because of a poor decision or because of circumstances, then a near kinsman, a relative, can purchase that land back to your family for you, and actually not just could purchase it, but had the responsibility to purchase it. And that way, again, you wouldn't, by my bad decision, wouldn't impoverish
bad luck.
or bad luck. Yeah, my bad decision or bad luck. I would not push my children into perpetual poverty. There was safety nets that allowed people to get out of that. Unfortunately, we have safety nets here, and I do think that sometimes one conservative party might be a little harsh on some of those laws. Another one too lenient. And I think we try to do our best, but we don't have the perfect law like God had in order to prevent generational poverty. And so it would be nice to be able to find that proper balance. And that's why I can't call myself a Democrat or a Republican. I've got to be independent because I see laws coming from both sides that if maybe this law is better than the left law is better than the right law, or the right law is better than the left law, and I've got to be able to vote, keep the freedom to vote either way. What would be nice is sometimes to blend some of those laws and get it balanced like God has in his Levitical law.
Well, and one of the unfortunate things that happen about, no matter, even if we reinstated some of those laws today, like taking God's perfect law for them, we don't have some of the underpinning that actually makes it work well.
Right.
So that's one of that makes it even harder to create laws that really fulfill these roles, because we don't have the built-in community and other things that actually make it really work, which God instilled for a reason.
Well, and culturally we're very different, so we can't even look. I mean, we don't. Although some will claim we have a highly patriarchal society, our society is not like it used to be. And males and females alike can own property, and hold jobs and do commerce. Where 20 or 3,500 years ago that wasn't the case. So, we're in a different place culturally. And not only that, we don't, as citizens, we don't have the opportunity, other than maybe referendum or some other things, to really write laws. That's done by our lawmakers. So we just, if we're well-versed in God's law, then we can say, when a bill comes up, we can say this bill will help or this bill will hurt. We vote for the bills that help, and we vote down the bills that we feel will hurt.
And the hard part is that help and hurt, you have to take the long view. A lot of times people take the short view. It's like, oh, this helps or hurts in the 6-month range. It's like, does that help or hurt in the 10-year range, in the 20, 30-year range? And a lot of people don't think about that. But God's laws have all those things in mind. Student
loan forgiveness is a good example of that. It would help a lot of people in the here and now. And I'm very sympathetic to those who are in debt for their education, but yet what's that going to do for my grandchildren or your grandchildren in the future? And so, and then sometimes laws like that, let's say debt forgiveness, is great for the moment. But what's going to happen for the next in 10 years from now when the next group of people are going through university? Are we going to have to do it again and again and again? So you got to take a look at what sometimes the underlying causes for some of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems like we've covered quite a bit, actually. I'm kind of surprised that we got through most of that. But I really appreciate you coming on and giving us some of that history of things and that wise, you know more. But thank you so much for listening and joining with us today. I honestly I'm not sure what next week is going to bring. But we're excited to keep kind of rolling through, what it means to be a Christian in society and in politics and what we're to do with that. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time. As always, God bless.